It is now my privilege and honor to introduce you to your speaker today, your guest speaker, Tom Baker. He grew up really with the Edgar Cayce readings as a result of a step-great-grandmother being healed by Edgar Cayce early on when he was giving readings. He's a former Catholic priest, a seminary professor. He's been a student of the Course in Miracles for 35 years. He's actually been a student of the Cayce readings for that long. I met him 35 years ago at a conference. He's also been a student of Unity. He used to teach priests how to give sermons. He's presently a licensed psychotherapist in private practice. He and his wife Kathy live in Virginia Beach. And in all honesty, if I had to list the handful of lecturers who touch my heart whenever they speak, Tom Baker would be on that list. Tom Baker.
Let me touch your heart right now.
He's wearing a Snoopy tie.
Yeah, everybody talking about where they started. I came to the ARE right after I was ordained a priest for the first time. No, I was only ordained one time. Not like I got ordained over and over again. Can you hear me okay? Use the mic. Yeah, mic? Okay. But I came to the ARE about 35 years ago. And I was paying homage to Edgar Cayce because I believe in God because of Edgar Cayce. Edgar Cayce was the only source of God or transcendence that I could really believe, even as a little kid, because Edgar's view of God was reasonable. God was not this raging alcoholic up in heaven trying to get us. So Edgar, it was just such a sensible God, and even when he called God the creative forces, it was so nice. You know, there was something that you joined. It was not something that you suffered from. So that was my beginning. When I was a Catholic priest, I would visit the hospital almost every day. And one of the interesting things, on the third floor of the Baptist Hospital in Louisville, Kentucky, there was on one end of the hall the intensive care unit, and at the other end of the hall was the nursery. And what I would do is I would go and spend time with people in ICU, in the ICU waiting room. And when people were especially discouraged, we would go down and look at the babies. And it always worked. People always got happy again. They looked cheerful. They started to have some hope. And around Christmas, they had these little red and white blankets that they had with the babies, and the babies looked like they were in Christmas stockings. They were very, very sweet. But the whole year is not like Christmas. I do past life regressions now. If my bishop could hear that, he would do more than roll his eyes. But I often get people between the life state in the spirit. And it's really interesting when they're there because they report that the scariest thing for them is getting born. This is not a polite little planet. This is a rough place. Evidently, Earth is one of the most severe planets in the universe. Leo Russell, the wife of Walter Russell, said of Earth, or going from spirit to Earth, it's like going from a 5-star hotel to live in a tent in Siberia. It's really impactful. What makes the Earth so tough I think, is the consciousness here. Cayce called it the consciousness of self. I would call it the consciousness of judgment. That's why people are afraid of public speaking. But some of you didn't want to say anything. Because even though you love each other dearly, there's that question in the back of your mind. Just like Sally Field. Remember when she said, "Oh, you like me." There's a question in the back of all of our minds that maybe you like me, but you might judge me. That's always a fear we have. It kind of rides along with us. I call it the judgmental consciousness. You might know it as the ego. Now, how many of you are married? How many of you have been married? Okay. Well, you'll know what I'm talking about then. When we're in courtship, when we're dating, if you notice, we always concentrate on the good about the person. We're so fascinated. We want to hear everything about them. In short, we're curious. And then you get married. And not always, but a lot of the time, the curiosity turns to criticism. The one that you so admired is the one you now are not so sure of. That is the ego. Okay? That everybody knows that. If you let go of judgments and resentments, marriage flourishes like a garden. We want marriages that are safe and loving. We also want a world that's safe and loving. The present Pope, Pope Francis, now that is a safe and loving man. He kind of first made his reputation by being interviewed, and somebody asked him a question about homosexuals. And he said, "Who am I to judge?" At that moment, the whole world stopped. The Pope is not judging. The church is not judging. And everyone kind of relaxed. Last Christmas, the Pope encountered a man who had tumors all over his body and face. He looked like he had mushrooms all over him. He was hideous looking. And the Pope leaned down and hugged him, and he kissed him. When people saw that, they relaxed. They knew that they were safe, and they knew that they were loved, if just for a moment. Now, as I said, for so much of our history, God has been this sort of raging alcoholic up there. And at Christmas, all of that is interrupted. Because instead of the God who's trying to judge us and condemn us and get us, we see transcendence in a baby. It's like people look over the rim of that cradle, and instead of seeing terror or horror or fear, they see a little baby. Now, I would say that Old Testament consciousness is never very far from our minds, as I said. It sort of rides with us. When I was a priest in my second parish, on Good Friday, it was night, the priest read the final part of the gospel. which Jesus dies on the cross, and he said, "It is finished." At that moment, it was raining, lightning struck the stained glass window right across from the priest, and it shattered. "It is finished." It was a bad look on people's faces. Nobody said, "Oh, that's silly," or "That's a coincidence," or "Don't worry about it." Especially the priest. He held onto that podium like that. We had the biggest crowd ever on Easter that year. Christmas is a time where God becomes something small and gentle, something we can all love, we can all agree with. I had a mystical experience one time when I was living in a Trappist monastery. And I'd been in the monastery for a couple of months, and I was not speaking. You don't speak in a Trappist monastery. So my mind had gotten very, very still. And I was walking to my little workstation one morning, and all of a sudden, everything changed. Everything was full of light. My hands were full of light. The fence was full of light. The grass, the barn, the tree, everything was full of light. And right after I saw everything full of light, I knew that everything was happy. The grass was happy. The fence was happy. The barn, the tree, the path, my hands. And then I looked up into heaven, and I knew that God was happy. He wasn't solemn. He wasn't overwhelming. He wasn't awe-striking. He was happy. And I put my fist on my hip, and I looked up and I said, "God, you wouldn't be so happy if you walked in my shoes a little bit." And at that moment, the light went away. Now, what I learned from that, first, is that God is happy. The whole world is happy. I went to my spiritual director, and I asked him about it, and he said, "Now you know how angry you are." I said, "Oh, I didn't feel angry." He says, "No, but you acted angry." So what happens at Christmas is that we have an alternative to that anger. We have innocence. We have joy. We have happiness. And we have forgiveness. I think it's important to say that with Christmas, Christian doctrine doesn't come into the world, but love comes into the world. Now, when people are between lives, they have a purpose for coming into the earth. And it's always only one purpose. I've asked about 50 people what their purpose is coming in. It is always the same thing: to bring love into the world. That's it. Sometimes we bring love as mothers and fathers, husbands, wives, teachers, physicians, people who work on the building. All of you here You bring love into the world. Now, usually we don't think about that. We don't think, oh, I'm bringing love into the world. We just say, I got to do my work, or I have to finish my project. But if you notice, look around you this Christmas, and notice how little transcendence there is in the world. Notice how very seldom even God is spoken of, or love is spoken of. It's not very much. And what you have here at the ARE is what all of us found. A God who was reasonable. A God who always gave you another chance. That's the loveliness of reincarnation. When I first discovered EDGAR CAYCE, I was 8 years old. And at show and tell, I took an EDGAR CAYCE book to school. And I explained to all the children and the teacher that this is not the only life we live. That we've probably been here 50 or 60 or 70 times. And they all looked back at me with judgmental looks. Their egos were alive and well, even at 8 years old. But you have a place here in which people come and they can study, they can attune to the creative forces, they can discover the holiness that is them. That's what you do for people in Virginia Beach. It's what you do in your publications and your conferences. And all the little things that you accomplish in 5 years, 10 years, 25 years. You're saying to the world, there's love here. There's transcendence. It's not all fake. Love is real, and love changes things. So my little message to you this Christmas is that you're the light of the world. It's a wonderful work you do. You're the kind of people that help me to believe in God. Thank you.